Minister Gayton McKenzie is dropping files. Opposition politicians have been appointed as chairpersons of parliamentary committees. GNU politics is heating up as the cabinet lekgotla begins. Let's dive into all that and more on this episode of SMWX. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. I'm Sizwe Mpofu-Walsh, your host on this channel where we explore South African politics through interviews and analysis. Welcome aboard. Like, share, subscribe. Help us get to 200,000 subscribers by the end of this year. Okay, we have a lot to discuss. Sit back, relax, because we're going to go through the list that Gayton McKenzie published, outing all artists and sports people who have received monetary compensation or funding or support from the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. We'll get into that in more detail. We're also going to look at what's happening in Parliament at the moment, because we've seen an unprecedented number of opposition MPs elected to powerful and important portfolio committee chairpersonships and just chairpersonships across Parliament. So we will have a look at that too. Right, let's have a look at Minister Gayton McKenzie's decision to publish a list of all those people who had received a relief grant during COVID-19. Now, apparently there have been more forms of financial assistance that we're also going to learn about in the future. But what was published by the department this week was a list of people who benefited from a COVID-19 social distress relief support fund. You know that government had a wider program of mitigating against the economic hardship of COVID-19. And within that program, the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture also created its own relief fund for artists and sports people, for example, if they had cancelled gigs and that kind of thing, or presumably if they had projects that they thought needed some financial support. So that's what was published. It was the COVID-specific list of those who'd been supported. And this came about as a result of allegations that the department hasn't or hadn't been doing enough to support the artistic sector. By the way, I know some of you looked for my name on that list. No, I did not receive any funding. So you can search as hard as you like, but I was not there. I know some podcasts ended up on that list. So anyway, at least you know you're safe here on SMWX. So the list and the publication of the list has sparked outrage and praise in equal measure. And I think that there are reasons to in some ways do both, because I think there are important benefits that come from this, but there are also reasons to be apprehensive. So what is good about this? I think Minister Gayton McKenzie is going to be very much like this in general, and in some instances he's going to shoot from the hip. He's often going to act without necessarily considering all the legal implications, and he is someone who governs, and I think this was the same in the Karoo, who doesn't like red tape and rules that constrain behavior. He likes to act quickly, and sometimes that can be great because it gives a sense that things are moving urgently, but sometimes you can also get tripped over potential, rules and regulations that might come back to haunt you. So what's good about this, I think, is a commitment to transparency. And it was actually really interesting to see this list and actually see people who've benefited. It was a 72 million rand in total list and lots of different artists benefiting. And what was fascinating to me is that it looked like it went to people who just understood the system rather than those who were necessarily the most needy and vulnerable. And I must say there were interesting racial dynamics to the list as well, to the extent that there was a huge overrepresentation of white artists on that list as well, where I was like, wow. And we've seen on social media, for example, people who seem to be quite wealthy and who criticize government, to high heaven, suddenly feeling like it was okay for them to be on the take from government as well. And I found that quite fascinating. Exactly who government support and who it should be supporting don't seem to be one and the same thing. And often it looks like those who criticize government are equally happy to take government money, but never actually acknowledge the support they got. So that was fascinating to see. It was also interesting to see the different people that one knew, recognized, from podcasts to, actors to musicians. And again, I saw a lot of names. I don't necessarily want to name and shame, but I saw a lot of names there where I was like, I'm pretty sure you don't need this money in the same way that others might need it. But at the same time, I guess you also had to justify. And when I looked at the press release from the department from the time of this grant, the department itself also lamented that a lot of people made applications, but they made mistakes in the application, which meant that they couldn't be considered. So it's clear that those who were able to tick all the boxes of the application, who maybe were used to making these kind of applications before, were the successful recipients. And the department acknowledged that they needed to do something more to make sure that other people who deserved these funds also got them, and maybe if you can't fill out a form perfectly, that doesn't necessarily indicate that you don't have a deserving project. It's just a formality, and it's a pity that that's the way it worked. And the publication of the list clearly showed that more established, actually quite rich people got some of this money. So that was eye-opening, to say the least. And I guess in some ways helps us understand, who benefited from these funds. And it does show that the department actually did do a lot of disbursement, if not work, during COVID-19. Fam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. Now, what is worrying, or maybe on the other side of the coin, is firstly, I have some privacy concerns. Did the people who applied for this know in advance, and did they give their consent to being publicly outed as having been recipients for this? Because there's a certain negative connotation, whether the department has intended it or not, around the publication of this list. It almost appears like a name and shame list. Now, I know that Minister McKenzie has been quick to distance himself from that interpretation, saying that, this is not just about shaming people, but it's also about showing that deserving people and people who are doing good work did get support. But unfortunately, the reality of the matter is the way it has played out in public, at least in part, has been a kind of exposing intention rather than an uplifting intention. So I wonder if those people who accepted the money would have done so in the knowledge that 3 or 4 years later, their names would have been published in a list like this. And there are some questions about having their privacy protected. At the same time, though, we also need to appreciate that this is public money, and concerns about privacy in private settings must be different when money that's being used is in fact the taxpayers and is the people's money. And so those privacy concerns may be offset by public imperatives for transparency. But if I was someone who was on that list, I wouldn't be feeling great about the way that I was just exposed. And I wonder whether in the application documents there was any suggestion that the subsequent publication of that would be. If there was, then there's nothing to complain about. So there is that. But I think it reveals something deeper here, which I've also seen with someone like Minister Dean McPherson at Public Works, and something that I foreshadowed in a previous video, but I didn't think it would come to fruition so soon, which is when you bring opposition into cabinet, one of the consequences of that is that information that was previously only held by ANC ministers and the ANC suddenly is now available to the public. And we get to see the inner workings of departments and ministries in ways that we didn't before. So just as with this list, we saw the Minister of Public Works, who comes from the DA, Dean McPherson, disclosing to the public that there has been something in the order of 300 million effectively lost by the Department of Public Works through some kind of hack. Now, the details of this have not become clear, exactly the way that the hack has resulted in this money leaving state coffers. But this is clearly something that the ANC government knew about and decided not to disclose. And yet, suddenly, we've got this disclosure. We've got this disclosure of the McKenzie list as well. And it's going to be very unsatisfactory for the ANC, and it's going to be uneasy for them the more that opposition ministers learn about what has been going on in these departments. And goodness only knows what will be uncovered. We're not even a week in, and we've already heard about all these artists being funded and 300 million going missing. So there is a deeper question about exactly how information is going to factor into this GNU situation. To what extent will opposition politicians feel loyalty to forms of cabinet secrecy versus the public's right to know what is happening with their money? I, for one, think in general it's a good thing that these disclosures happen, and I hope opposition politicians in cabinet will treat the public interest as more important than cabinet oaths of secrecy, because I want to know what's been happening. At the same time, these disclosures can also be used as political weapons. And I think the closer we emerge to elections, to the extent that we still have a coalition government, things could get really, really wild and uncomfortable. So as we head into this cabinet lekgotla, I'm going to be interested to see exactly how information is tightly managed, or whether it continues to start leaking out in embarrassing ways for particularly the ANC government. Cool. So that's part one. Part two for me is just having a look at cabinet committees. Now, cabinet committees are often not in the news. They're not a really newsworthy item, but these are important, not cabinet, parliamentary committees. These are important committees where decisions of oversight and scrutiny and accountability are taken, where the government has to explain its plans. And we have seen a number of committees that have opposition politicians. So I want to go and review this. Now, let's have a look at the good. I'm happy that someone like Songezo Zibi, for example, is chairing the Scopa committee. That has always actually traditionally been for an opposition politician. Themba Godi used to chair it. And now Mkhuleko Hlengwa from the IFP chaired it over the last 5 years. He's a deputy minister now. Rise Mzansi's Songezo Zibi is chairing it. Now, he has always campaigned, and Rise Mzansi campaigned on a platform of clean governance, of public accountability and transparency. So this is a unique opportunity for them to, if you'll excuse the pun, put, let's say, the state's money where their mouths are, and ensure that they bring to bear scrutiny and oversight over the SCOPA, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. This is a key place where you get to interrogate government finances, government spending, and get answers for where and why funds have gone missing. Another interesting and I think noteworthy appointment is Musi Maimane, who we've had on this channel before, at the Committee on Appropriations. This is also a key committee because this is the committee which has the final, or not necessarily final, but it considers where government spends its money. So the appropriations bill is where government ultimately decides to invest its budget in different places. And of course, that has to be looked at. It has to be scrutinized. Questions have to be asked about why here and not there, why this much and not that much, which priority areas deserve which amount of money. And of course, you get to see where the budget is going. So we've got these two opposition politicians who are in an interesting oversight role, able to, again, bring out any forms of corruption. And I hope that this is what they will do in those roles, is disclose, disseminate, and let the public understand where money is being misspent, if it is being misspent. So that looks good. Ian Cameron and Wouter Wessels have become committee chairpersons. Now, that sounds like a dangerous move to me. I mean, even Ian Cameron was involved in this scandal around racism and blackface. I don't think he's actually apologized for that. So I assume he still stands by that protest in which he draped himself in blackface and claimed that affirmative action was some kind of form of reverse racism against white South Africans. Now, that doesn't have a great deal to do on the face of it with his function as chairperson of the Committee on Police. Although racism and policing have often gone together in South African history, and there are important racial inequalities in the provision of policing and in who has access to policing services. So, but that aside, it does seem to me like a very bold decision from the DA, who know that there's a cloud over this person who hasn't apologized for those statements and just saying, well, we're going to put them in that position anyway. So I'm a little skeptical for now. I know that Cameron is supposed to care deeply about policing issues, but I hope he won't bring those biases to bear as he exercises control and oversight over the policing function. So that stood out to me as a dangerous one for the DA, because they could be inviting political pressure for no reason. Similarly, Wouter Wessels from the Freedom Front Plus has made some bizarre statements about how human rights in South Africa don't mean anything because race and sport quotas, discriminate against the white minority. Again, just fanciful thinking, and not clear to me why someone who holds those kinds of views should be in a position of such public importance. And mark my words, this will irk ANC supporters as well as EFF, MK, and other supporters who really don't like these views and people being given power who hold these views. So interesting from the GNU, because I think that will certainly irk people. But on the other hand, the Zibis and the Maimanes, I think, will also allay people's fears and make people see that this is about distributing power. But it's a bitter pill to swallow for many. But look, I have an open mind. Let's see what these committees do, and let's see how they exercise their power and their functions. And if they do so in a manner that is befitting of praise, I will be the first to praise. Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch, and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. There are some other questions. I don't know, and just as I was preparing for this, I wasn't able to fully verify it. So let me know in the comments. But I saw a D Pule, and I know that Dinah Pule is a member of parliament, and it seems like she's the chair of one committee. Now, she had to resign, if it is Dinah Pule, from parliament, not from parliament, from cabinet, because of impropriety relating to how one of her partners or her partner benefited in the Zuma administration. Now, if you had to resign for corruption-related reasons in the Zuma administration, then you were like, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. So I must check that, but I would be worried again there. You've got Supra Mahumapelo, who we know defended the Guptas, who is now chair of the DIRCO committee. So even the ANC, once again, like the DA, is not afraid to put people who have courted controversy into these important committee chairpersonship roles. Kusela Diko, who I think was later cleared, but she had to step away from being the presidential spokesperson also because of her partner. So there are people over whom there has at one time been a cloud who the ANC is still putting its faith in. We know Zizi Godwa, for example, is currently still a member of parliament and still on committees. So the ANC, again, is also taking a political gamble there, but they're probably hoping that people are looking at cabinet, looking at other places, and will forget about these committee chairpersonships, just as other parties are too. But again, let's keep an open mind. Maybe these chairs will do great work, and if they do, then they should be praised for that particular work. But it's only right to also raise the earlier questions. So, we have an interesting committee system. I'll be interested in particular to see how opposition parties use their role as chairpersons of committees to hold government accountable, disclose and expose any wrongdoing, while also trying to remain in an uneasy coalition. Thanks for watching this episode of SMWX. Like, share, subscribe, help take us to 200,000 subscribers, and keep it locked on this here channel. Have a good one. Aye.